We have a lot of congressmen and some senators down today, and they're all up in arms over this. They can't even believe it. We have quite a few congressmen. I guess you'll be talking to them in a little while.
Day after day now, Trump surrogates have been setting up shop outside the court and talking to the press. Trump himself is barred by his gag order from talking about all sorts of people connected to this trial. He is also barred from directing others to talk about those people, which is what makes all of this so concerning. When Trump's latest batch of surrogates spoke today, they again attacked two individuals the judge has specifically identified as off-limits, Michael Cohen and the judge's own daughter.
Well, I'm honored to be here with my colleagues from the House Freedom Caucus, where we watched Michael Cohen get dog-walked through the series of lies he has told.
Perjurer in chief, Michael Cohen.
Mr. Cohen admitted repeatedly that he lied.
To Cohen, who had admitted to lying to members of Congress.
Michael Cohen.
Seeing the lack of credibility from Michael Cohen.
We would be remiss if we did not mention this corrupt judge, this judge whose own family is making six figures off of Democrat politics.
We have a judge whose daughter.
A corrupt judge whose daughter.
A judge is his own daughter.
The judge's daughter.
That's the judge's daughter.
All of that clearly breaks the judge's gag order if Trump indeed directed it. So the question now is, did he?
This gag order is to ensure that he cannot defend himself fairly. So we're here to have his back. We're here to defend him. We are President Trump's voice. We have his back. He will ultimately be proven innocent. Thank you.
Joining me once again are my colleagues Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell. Rachel, the contention here is these people here are here as members of the public. I know you have been to the courtroom, and I hear it's a difficult thing. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like for you getting seats and how coveted those seats were?
It's a big, long line, and you have to wait forever, and there's tons of security, and it blows out your whole day. And I mean, Lawrence has been doing it every day. It's no easy thing. It did, I think, cost some of those members of Congress votes today in D.C. I mean, I have to say, I'm a big believer in people showing up to court. And if you know somebody who's on trial and you believe in their innocence, or whether or not you believe in your innocence, you just want to support them, being there for them, I think that's a good thing. There's a reason that our courtrooms are open to the public. There's a reason that our judicial system is a transparent one, so everybody can see the proceedings and everybody can show up to support somebody if they know is involved in the system. But if you are a, public official, a prominent person, the kind of person who's going to speak to the cameras when you walk out during the morning break, the sort of normal course of events is to say, I'm here to support my friend or my colleague or my boss or the guy who I want to hire me to be vice president, whatever it is. I'm here to support X person. I believe in X person's innocence, and I believe the jury is going to see that truth too. And I wish these charges had never been brought, but I believe that this is going to be borne out in the end, and everybody will see that my friend, my colleague, my boss is innocent. Like that's all good. That's all normal. Instead, what you're getting is these members of Congress saying, we're here to support him, and the American legal system is illegitimate and corrupt. And the judge is corrupt, and let me tell you about the judge's family. And that is just a wholly different thing. It is a hard thing to have people in very high office committing crimes in this country. It was hard with Nixon. It was hard with Agnew. It's hard with Trump. There's a reason that sitting presidents can't get prosecuted. Like, it's all very difficult. But when instead you've got a political party saying the American legal system should be gotten rid of because it's corrupt and the people involved in it are corrupt and bad and evil and persecuting you and me, that is something totally different. That is corrosive to the legal system at a minimum, and potentially fundamentally destructive to it if that's going to become the new platform on which the Republican Party makes the case to the American people that they should be put back in full power.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels at which this is appalling, Lawrence. There's the big picture that Rachel's just outlining. There's the smaller picture of what it's doing to potential witnesses in this trial. I mean, there was a whole back and forth about these surrogates being in the trial during cross-examination, walking by. Michael Cohen has to walk by them. I mean, going out there and impugning Michael Cohen and then sitting in the courtroom as he's testifying. Can you talk a little bit about sort of net effect that this is having as you go to this trial every day?
In the courtroom, no effect at all. You know the old parliamentary phrase, backbenchers. That's what they became because there were too many of them today. There's a row in the front behind Donald Trump for supporters like this, and there's usually not more than 2 or 3 of them who ever show up. But there were so many of them that they were literally sent to the back bench of the courtroom that's against the wall, farthest away from the hero. And, you know, most of them were people who I didn't know who they were. I mean, I knew they were members of Congress because there's a button there, but it's not like they're the most prominent members of Congress. Some of them I knew who they were. But they have absolutely no effect on the proceedings. I will say, with that shot of them outdoors, that's the largest collection of Trump supporters who have ever gathered at the publicly available gathering place for all Trump supporters to come. You'll notice there's no one behind them. NYPD has reserved a spot there for citizens from all over America or New York City or even Lower Manhattan, voters, Trump supporters, Biden voters. Anyone can gather there. No one comes. Donald Trump wanted them to come. They refused to come. Those people came.
That's who showed up.
And that's his biggest crowd ever. Here's an opportunity they had because, you know, what they do is they come in for the morning session. They leave at the first recess, which is, you know, like 11 a.m., and they never come back. Matt Gaetz is the only one who came back. But now they've been in the courtroom. They've been there for 2 hours. You watched Judge Merchan. Instead of coming out and talking about his daughter, why don't you come out and talk about his rulings? Because you just watched him make some rulings. Yeah. You watched him rule on several objections. And you watched him overrule the prosecutor's objections a number of times. Did you agree with that? You watched him sustain some objections. Do you understand why he sustained those objections? Because what Todd Blanche just said was argumentative and not a question. Do you understand what that objection was about? So one of the great tragedies of this trial not being televised is that they get to go out there and lie about how this trial is going, because none of them have ever in their lives seen, and they never will see, a more fair judge than Judge Merchan. And any televised version of this trial would prove that every minute of the trial.
Yeah, Chris Hayes referred to him as a picture of equanimity.
Yes.
They want to get at least one juror to so thoroughly doubt Michael Cohen's testimony that basically they can't, in good conscience, be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump did it. And here's why that matters legally. We're not all just talking about Michael Cohen because we remember him or he was loud or on TV a lot, although today they did discuss his dealings with everyone from the New York Times' Maggie Haberman to our own colleague Katie Tur. That's part of the case because media and interaction is part of what he did for Trump for many years. It's not that. It's really quite specifically that they land the idea that this guy is not on the level now, that what he said in this very trial is fundamentally unreliable, or that they have doubt about it. So I'm going to go through these lines of attack with you. And if you're sitting here watching going, oh, seems like the DA is in some choppy waters, that's true. That's what's happening. Doesn't mean they can't win the case, and doesn't mean you have to like it. There are plenty of people, including witnesses we've heard from, who are all around Donald Trump, people who once liked and supported him, who really feel that justice should be done, that he should face his accountable day in court, that he should be convicted, as Ms. Daniels said when she answered if the evidence supports it. So we're not here telling you whether to like this or not. We're here giving you, as we always try to do, the full facts of what's going down right now. So one line of attack today was the possible ulterior motives. Cohen pressed to confirm that the trial's outcome will affect him personally. And he said yes, pressing Cohen on how his history here is very personally wrapped up, that he had failed in a bid to get out of jail early, that he asked for that several times. And then, as part of this idea that he has perhaps a vendetta that has distorted the truth, the accuracy of what he's told the jury, today, like we've seen in earlier days, the lawyers really bore down on Cohen's ups and downs with Donald Trump. During his legal problems, how he did want a pardon. Cohen, though, adding the context in his answer that that issue came up because it was dangled to him, and he wanted this nightmare to end. Cohen's anger at being rebuffed from any White House job whatsoever came up. And again, that matters because the question being raised is whether that has passed the point of anger, which he's allowed to feel. He's a human being. and curdled into something that involves a vendetta where the truth might be sacrificed. For example, whether he has spun that story or lied about that history. And Cohen said on the stand he did ask to be President Trump's personal attorney, but not a different role of general counsel. Now, it went on and on like this today, on and on and on, if you will, just like it did the other day. And so it's possible that this style, this meandering road, could make jurors bored or dilute the larger point that the defense attorneys are trying to make, the doubt I've told you they're trying to raise. It's also possible, though, on the other hand, and I was thinking about this watching Cohen kind of go through it hour by hour today, that the nicks and cuts can slowly eat away at his credibility as the key witness to Donald Trump's state of mind in 2016. Another way to put this is, if the DA thought they could clearly prove and win this case without Michael Cohen, they would have brought this case without putting Cohen on the stand. There are other people who were involved they didn't put on the stand, other people who work for Trump, Susan McDougal. He's on the stand because without the other money guy, Weisselberg, who's in jail, which can't be used against Trump in court, but certainly makes Trump look bad in here in the real world. Voters and others can factor that in. The guy who was at the top of the financial food chain at Trump org has been to jail twice now. But without Weisselberg, without the CFO, they needed Cohen as the only other Trump aide who could speak to Trump's state of mind. That's why he's important. Now, Trump lawyers also, after things got, like I told you, sometimes a little meandering or boring, he found ways to dial it right back up. For example, bearing down on Cohen's storytelling in this very case in a moment that grew heated, pushing Cohen on this phone call that he made, and they have the record, so they can see the call went into Trump's bodyguard in 2016. And Cohen insists that through that call, he spoke directly to Trump. And that's a viable story because Donald Trump, like other top people, can get calls to a main line, to a cell phone, to a secretary, to a security line, and then it's handed over. In sourcing and reporting, we do that all the time. You don't always get the top people directly. So the story from Cohen is he called the bodyguard and then spoke to Trump. And that call mattered because he says it was on that call where he and Trump connected through someone else's phone, and it was incriminating because Cohen personally assured Trump the hush money deal was done. Well, today, Trump's lawyer pounded on that. That was a lie, he practically yelled, suggesting Cohen maybe only spoke to the bodyguard and was now trying to make it worse and add this other detail, which then becomes just something that, people can debate. Now, that's a big moment. It doesn't mean Cohen was lying, and it doesn't mean the jury buys that, but it's certainly memorable, and it allows the defense to kind of put this front and center, and then they're going to probably refer back to it in their closing arguments. Remember we told you? Remember we raised the question? He was lying then. He admitted some lies. Other lies he's denying. You can't take this guy's word. Now, as for the response, Michael Cohen simply suggested that attack, that impugning of his character, was not accurate. He continued, I believe I spoke to Mr. Trump about the Stormy Daniels matter. Trump's lawyer retorting, we're not asking for your belief. This jury does not want to hear what you think happened. Yes, I'm doing my best court reporting here, giving you a little spice, a little energy on it. Mr. Blanche was generally respectful, but he would dial it up that way at times, and he has these certain tricks. He would say, is there any doubt? Or if you don't have a doubt of that, then you have to admit it. He would use these kind of, well, they're basically lawyer tricks, and he would do the one I just read to you as well, where you basically say, we're not asking for that, we're asking for this. It's tactical. I don't think it's going to win or lose the case, but it's the kind of way that the lawyer was trying to get Cohen cornered. That's one memorable exchange, played out for the jury as the audience for this tale about who's telling the truth. So Cohen's not having his best week of the trial, not the best week of his life with all this, but not the worst either. And remember, the prosecutors have been ready. The testimony comes on the heels of corroboration from many other witnesses of the core outline of what Cohen is asserting, like David Pecker, like Stormy Daniels, like the documents. And again, I don't know exactly what the prosecutors will say in their closing, but if they're any good, they will try to close the circle on what they said in their opening. And what they said in their opening is, we're going to show you all the facts before we ever get to Michael Cohen. And they're basically implying that if you think Cohen is lying about this key stuff, it couldn't just be him. You'd have to have all these other people risking so much, including perjury charges, to make up some sort of conspiracy. And then why would Donald Trump cut the checks? Now, Trump's lawyers took a kitchen sink approach here. At one point today, The lawyer even said, sorry, we're jumping around a little bit, and it was more than a little bit. But they landed some blows on Cohen's credibility. And this afternoon, I want to show you another part again, so you can make sense of what's happening and why people are saying that the jury might have more questions about Cohen at the end of the day than the start. So they asked Cohen about something he did that, again, doesn't mean he's always a liar, but it does mean he lied. And he did something I could tell you that's very unusual, that lawyers aren't supposed to do, that's a violation of bar rules. He was secretly recording his own client, breaching legal ethics. And Trump's attorney said, you understand it's not ethical for a lawyer to record a conversation with their own client, correct? Cohen admits that's correct. And then he admitted that he did exactly that with Donald Trump. And then to explain the reasoning, it was to share it with a third party. Now, again, this is not a crime, and it's not alleged to be a crime. But if you do that as a lawyer, you are breaking the very privilege that you take an oath to uphold. The privilege, of course, means, as you probably heard, if you tell your lawyer something, they don't just keep it secret while they represent you. They could stop representing you, and they take it to the literal grave. They don't tell anyone else. They certainly don't tell anyone else with a live recording, which breaks the privilege. And by the way, if you want to get into it, he did that to a member of the media, even a friendly member of the media, the pro-Trump media, whatever you want to call it. Talk about breaking it. He's putting it all the way out there. Now, that could, again, be a part of what I'm calling these nicks and cuts about the jury's perception of Cohen and whether they ultimately believe him about the core stuff. Another thread from today is something we've heard a lot about, and it's one of the hardest things for Trump's side to explain. We've played this tape for you. This is the same thing I mentioned, the recording, right? So there's the ethical part, which cuts against Cohen. But then there's what's on the tape, which very clearly cuts against Donald Trump, like it or not, how the tape got created, when he seems to sound like not only secretive, but has a type of consciousness of guilt in wanting to pay the hush money in cash. Those are Trump's own words. I'm going to play for you again. Cohen made the tape about paying in cash. This was for the model story, Karen McDougal.
I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
What financing?
We'll have to pay you. So
Don't pay the kid.
No.
No. And here's what we learned today. You've probably, if you follow the news, you follow this trial, you've heard that tape. I've told you that tape's bad for Trump. And I'm not sure there's a good way to explain it away. But at a trial, you get to hear both sides. And I don't mean this as a diss to the Trump lawyers. Sometimes creative lawyering helps add doubts or complicate a story. It is up to the jury, not to you, not to me, not to any outside observer. It's up to the jury to decide what they think that tape means in full holistic context of all the evidence. But this is interesting today, and it's new. This is the first time we've kind of heard how they're going to deal with this. Trump's defense lawyers making the argument that Trump didn't mean actual cash, actual dollar bills, but that he was distinguishing between just using his own money and financing. Now, Cohen disputes that, although he says, yes, separately, that they would, in the world of real estate, discuss all cash transactions. Question here is if that's a totally different context. And if you think about it, this is why everyone deserves their day in court if they're accused of a crime. Because I'm not saying the Trump argument there is a good argument. I would weight it as unlikely to be true, based on everything we know. But they are raising what I've told you they're going to do, which is this reasonable doubt. Does that tape alone, or that tape with other evidence, give you 100% beyond a reasonable doubt style confidence? It's not technically 100, but, high confidence that he was being secretive, that he had consciousness of guilt, and that's why he said cash? Or will some jurors sit there and go, well, if people talk about all cash real estate transactions, I've heard of that, and it just means not going to the bank and taking money out, but it just means not using financing or a loan, maybe this was that. Now, if you're sitting through all of this and going, okay, Ari, what's the point? There is no point today. The defense doesn't have to prove anything, and they don't have to have a conclusion, and they don't have to have some grand narrative for the end of the day. All they're trying to do is make this jury believe Michael Cohen a little bit less than they believed him yesterday and the day before.
What is your sense of the dog that hasn't barked yet? I mean, Michael Cohen hasn't fallen apart. He hasn't melted. He hasn't erupted. He hasn't stood up and screamed, liar, liar, pants. I mean, Michael Cohen has kept his you-know-what together under a cross so bad that the person carrying it out has apologized to the jury in front of the jury.
Right. We did hear Michael Cohen yell once this morning, though, and it was during a recording. It was the first time the jurors have actually heard the other side of Michael Cohen. But he has really kept it together under pressure. I mean, it's especially today. I maybe just have a little bit of a different take on calling balls and strikes here on what happened today in court. And I think both things can be true. And we should talk about that. But I also think that they did some damage to Michael Cohen today. They spent, I don't know how many hours, several hours this morning going through his lies. And it's at points you were just like, where are they going? Because it was moving everywhere. But they were not just minor lies. They were lies under oath, just like he is under oath now. They did that, and then they lead up to the call. And I thought it was effective. I thought it cast some doubt on the credibility of that call. He has a 1 and 36-second call that he places to Keith Schiller. And right before that, he's not just getting one harassing call. He's getting multiple harassing calls from an unknown number. One time, the person forgets to hide the number. He gets the number. He has a long back and forth with the person saying, and the person's 14 years old, allegedly. We don't know this for sure. We don't know what's going on here, but the person's like, oh, I'm really sorry. And Michael's like, I'm very Michael Cohen. I'm going to sick the Secret Service on you. And they have a whole exchange.
Michael Cohen wasn't a protectee of the Secret Service.
I know, but this is the threat. And then he calls Keith Schiller. And in that call, he managed apparently to achieve both, to relay all this information about the harassing phone call to Keith Schiller, and then he manages also to get through to the president and relay the information about the payment to Stormy has been made. That could have happened, but I felt that it was effective, that they cast some doubt on it. But to Vaughn's point, even if they did, there's so much more evidence that they haven't even brought up. Most of the cross-examination has simply been a character assassination of Michael Cohen, and not to say that they don't need to do that, but they haven't spoken to so much of the evidence already, and it looks like they're wrapping up. So I think they're hoping that this one shot that they think is effective will cast doubt on everything. I'm skeptical of that, but I did think today they got a hit in, and it's not a knockout, but it was a hit.
We say every day we have no idea what's landing with the jury. I have been on a jury 2 times, so I only speak as a former juror. Sometimes what you're experiencing is agitation that you're still there. Sometimes you're riveted. Sometimes you are feeling what the lawyers want you. We have no idea.
No idea.
I want to ask you, Charles, about something David Kelly said on this program, which is that he has put up witnesses and I think his word was schizophrenic drug addicts, and he was quick to say Michael Cohen isn't that. Mm-hmm. But once a case has been established, to the degree that this case has been established through documents, through witnesses very friendly and affectionate toward the defendant, you're, in his example, schizophrenic drug addict. It doesn't, you know what they say, they're there as a corroborator. So the mission itself, stepping back, of destroying, smearing, and maligning a witness who the prosecution on direct was pretty thorough in impugning and indicting his past conduct, including, I think, everything Todd Blanche went over today, the lies to Congress, the guilty pleas, the prison. I think the prosecution had dealt with most of those chapters of Michael Cohen's life on direct.
I think that the prosecution has ample space to make this case not about Michael Cohen's testimony, given everything else that they've presented on their case in chief. There's so much other evidence that they can rely on in terms of summation, where you don't have to necessarily put Michael Cohen at the center in terms of his credibility and everything that he talked about. There are enough other witnesses who provided evidence and testimony that has placed Michael Cohen in the room, that has made Michael Cohen an actor, such that it corroborates his account of what things are, and you don't have to take it firsthand from him if you think that he's a scumbag or unbelievable or what have you. Any prosecutor, particularly at the state level, has dealt with unsavory witnesses that we wish we had alternatives for, and you don't. And so the way around that is to focus on the evidence that works for you and the witnesses that aren't as problematic to make your case. They can easily do it. I think that the defense, in terms of where this sort of punch today landed, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's about the heft of the hit that they made in terms of the prosecution's case. And I would agree with Sue, this October 24th phone call is not something to sort of gloss over and miss. But to Vaughn's point, and I think Vaughn is absolutely correct, when you step back, you still have to answer the question to the jury, does this still make sense in terms of the overall narrative that you are trying to get the jury to buy? If you're the defense, to Andrew's point, are you going to try and say Michael Cohen did all of this out of the goodness of his heart? He got upset. He was still personal attorney to the president of the United States of America, and he's lying about everything. That's a lot for the jury to sort of process in one sitting. I do think, and this is important though, as we sit and have conversations about the defense and their strategy doesn't have to be as well defined as the prosecution, because all they're trying to do in any realm that they can is create reasonable doubt. I do think that there is a conversation to be had about whether the inconsistency or perceived inconsistency around this October 24th conversation creates reasonable doubt in the minds of a juror. So it's important to understand the jury's, the defense's line, it doesn't have to be straightforward. It can be all over the place because all they're trying to do is poke a hole.
Well, I guess, Vaughn, I would just say as a former juror, if I've sat there for 19 days and whether I was going to decide that there was evidence that he was innocent or guilty hinged on the October 24th call, I probably wasn't going to go with guilty in the first place. I mean, what is your sense of what else Blanche has? We've just learned that Blanche plans to be done Monday before the morning break, so he doesn't have much more. So this was it, probably either his second best shot or sort of beginning of the end. I don't know I don't know how much time there is Monday before the first morning break.
Right. I think that there's a question. Does he go back to the morning of October 26 when Donald Trump and Michael Cohen had two different phone calls lasting several minutes before Cohen went and set up an account over at First Republic to begin that wire transfer? Is he going to ask him about the October 28th phone call in the 11 a.m. hour after he finalized the non-disclosure agreement with Stormy Daniels through Keith Davidson? Those are outstanding questions, and this story will come through closing arguments. And as I've learned from Andrew Weissman, it's the job of the prosecution to prove the defendant's guilt. At the same time, the defense for Donald Trump has yet to provide an alternative story or an alternative timeline to the events that the prosecution has detailed in chronological order. The defense team, Todd Blanche and Susan Necklace, they have not provided for this jury a more specific timeline of when Donald Trump did, in fact, become familiar with this alleged arrangement of $130,000 from Michael Cohen to Stormy Daniels. Was it in early February 2018 after the Wall Street Journal wrote about it? Those are some of those outstanding questions that, frankly, the jury in closing arguments, when they're looking at the two-side storylines, they're very different because Donald Trump publicly hasn't answered those questions. And so far, his defense attorneys haven't tried to paint their own clear version of events for this jury either.
So Andrew, on that point of Vaughn's, I mean, so the defense's story is that he didn't have sex with Stormy Daniels. He did make every single decision. He did require his CFOs and other lieutenants to haggle down every single bill, and he did pay more than 2x what the reimbursement is to Stormy Cohen without looking at it.
And didn't take any negative actions with respect to Weisselberg and Cohen. In other words, this is somebody who
to Vaughn's also other point, I'm sorry, is Cohen's in the fold till 18.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the idea is this has happened behind his back, which, we know from everyone is not supposed to happen. And as Michael Cohen had repeatedly said today, like, if I did that, I'd be fired. So this is all happening. The story has to be it's all happening behind his back. And he did not know about it. And what happens, Weisselberg and Cohen, according to Hope Hicks, he says, Hope Hicks has him saying, thank God Michael did this. I mean, this isn't what the hell did you do? And I can't believe that you passed these checks to me and I didn't know what I was signing. And I'm paying you twice as much money as I should be. And you never told me.
And I did it 12 times.
And by the way, I'm now on record saying I reimbursed Michael Cohen for payments to a porn star. I mean, it sounds like he hasn't admitted that. So the narrative is going to be difficult. I wanted to just raise one thing.
Please.
Because this is definitely like you always try your last case. A blunder.
I can't wait for this.
This is going to be the Mueller investigation. But there was Todd Blanche did do a better job today. As I said, low bar, but he did do a better job. But with respect to the testimony where Michael Cohen lies in front of Congress, and the lies are distancing Donald Trump from the Moscow Tower, that is...
We should say what they are. He lies about the times that he talked to Trump about building a Trump Tower Moscow.
Exactly.
It was 10 and he says 3 before Congress.
Exactly.
But there's reasons why.
And he wants to also make it earlier. So he's trying to basically be like, don't worry, not during the campaign, and it was much
smaller. No collusion.
It was very much like this. It was earlier and it was little. And so and Todd Blanche goes to that and says, and you submitted a 2-page document. This wasn't your spur of the moment testimony. This was a 2-page document that's false. And Michael Cohen on cross, this is like, you shouldn't be bringing out bad facts, says, yes, that's not just my statement. That false statement that I admitted was perjury, which, by the way, could only have been done for the president, right? Michael Cohen had zero interest personally in that. That was done by a joint defense committee that included the president of the United States lawyer. Right. I mean, that was like putting, if you want sort of the Costello, what's happening behind the scenes, what are the lawyers doing? I mean, he just directly implicated Donald Trump in that scheme.
Well, and back to the narrative that you keep bringing us back to, if the narrative is that he rolled like a mob boss, Cohen on cross gave them another example of how he did that.
Totally.
Today, prosecutor Susan Hoffinger called for a sidebar about the ongoing presence of Donald Trump's Republican entourage in the courtroom. Here is how that played out. This is Hoffinger. I noticed that some of his guests are already here today with their security detail, but we would just ask that they not be allowed to file in the middle of Mr. Blanche's cross-examination. It's with their security detail for the jury and the witnesses to see. The court, yes, I would advise that that not happen. Todd Blanche. Your Honor, I have less than zero control over what is happening on anything or anyone that's behind me when I am crossing a witness. I don't know I don't have any control over that. I mean, they are members of the public. To be clear, these lawmakers are not sitting in public seats. They're sitting in seats reserved for Donald Trump's defense team. Joining me now is California Congressman Adam Schiff, member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Schiff, thank you for being here. I imagine you have some thoughts about your fellow House colleagues who have been trekking up to New York City to stand outside of the courtroom and weigh in on this trial.
I have so many thoughts, and, let me start with the speaker, because I have to say I was flabbergasted that he would go and make that pilgrimage, stand outside that courthouse, and basically lie about what was going on inside the building. It's bad enough that he lacks the self-respect that he feels he needs to go and kiss the ring in such a public and debasing way, but also for him to denigrate the justice system, for him to knowingly make the false claim that this trial was designed to keep Trump off the campaign trail. He knows better than that, but it shows, the most powerful, top-ranking Republican in the Congress, will do anything for Donald Trump. And for those others, the Matt Gaetzes, the Anna Paulina-Lunas, I mean, these are crazy people, and you don't expect much more. But I will say this, too. The fact that some of them are going into the courtroom, this is a way to tamper with the jury. This is a way to essentially communicate to the jury that we believe this is political. We're here to show support for the president. That's making a statement without having to say a word. And that is distressing for much the same reason.
Congressman, because you singled out the speaker, I do have to ask, you were one of 163, I think it's 163 Democrats who voted to effectively save Speaker Johnson from a motion to vacate. Do you have any regrets about that? And would you do it again if there was another call to oust him from his position?
I don't regret it because 2 reasons. One, we need a governing entity in the House. They have the majority. As long as they have the majority, we need somebody sitting in that speaker's chair. I want to get things done for my constituents. We've got major challenges with housing, with the cost of child care and other things. I want to get things done. You can't do that without a speaker in the chair. Second, I didn't believe it was right to essentially vacate him from the chair because he finally got around to approving Ukraine aid.
So for both those reasons, I don't have any regrets. But I have to say, it's still difficult to stomach when you see him do what he did standing in front of that courthouse. And it just shows you that there is no one in that Republican conference anymore, not since Liz Cheney left, not since Adam Kinzinger left, that has any real thorough commitment to the Constitution, their oath, our system of justice. It's all about keeping power, gaining power, and no debasement too great before their supreme leader.
Yeah, well, it's worth noting that the cynical moves did not end at the New York City courthouse. A lot of those same members had to travel back to Washington to vote to hold the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, in contempt for refusing to hand over the tapes of the conversations that President Biden had with the special counsel, Robert Hur. The 1-2 punch.
You're absolutely right.
The 1-2 punch of standing out there. Sitting, yeah. Tell me more about that endeavor.
Well, I was sitting in that Judiciary Committee as a member of the committee as they were bringing up this bogus effort to hold the Attorney General in contempt for not giving audio tapes of something they already had the transcript for. It's come to that pathetic a motion to hold the Attorney General of the United States in contempt for, so they can give tapes to his campaign team for campaign commercials. That is Donald Trump's campaign. But meanwhile, you had Republican members missing from the whole debate because they're in New York. You had members like Matt Gaetz who missed the vote completely. Shows you where their priority is. They don't think it's important enough to stay in Washington to vote on holding the Attorney General in contempt if it has to compete with being a spectator in the hush money payment to a porn star trial of Donald Trump. And the thing that I find so shocking about all this is I have to imagine, and I made this point in committee, that if you asked Mike Johnson 10 or 15 years ago whether he could ever see himself standing in front of the courthouse, vouching for the character effectively of someone charged with paying hush money payments to a porn star, he would have never imagined himself doing such a crass thing. And yet there he is. And it's one small surrender of, morality followed by another slightly bigger surrender, followed by another surrender. And pretty soon you're standing outside the courthouse vouching for the character of someone paying hush money to a porn star.
Yeah, speaking of surrender of ethics, I do want to get your reaction to the New York Times reporting tonight that Justice Samuel Alito was reportedly flying a Stop the Steal flag in front of his house in and around January 17th of 2021. You were on the House January 6th committee. You know this saga quite well. Do you have a thought on that, given the role the Supreme Court has played and is playing around January 6th and holding those accountable?
This is why Americans have no trust in the Supreme Court anymore. They see a justice with a flag, essentially a Stop the Steal flag outside their home, presiding, sitting in cases affecting the investigation into that effort to incite the attack on the Capitol. You have Justice Thomas, whose wife was in text messages and email communications about this effort to overturn the election, sitting and voting against, as a member of the court, voting against providing documents to Congress that might implicate his spouse. Not just a perceived conflict, but a real conflict. And this is why people have no confidence in the court. And there at the moment is no recourse for this. They can violate the code of ethics because there is no enforceable code of ethics for the Supreme Court. But I think, as you were discussing earlier with respect to Alito, he's proud of his disdain for public opinion. He is, more than willing to wear his partisan colors on his sleeve, or in this case, on the flagpole.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you for joining me tonight. Really appreciate your time, sir.
Up in a week that really could be make or break, as key witness Michael Cohen took the stand, unloaded on Trump, definitely hurt him, but then found himself on defense, with Trump's fate now hanging in the balance.
The star witness takes the stand against Donald J. Trump.
Michael Cohen, now the star witness in the New York versus Trump trial. Cohen on the stand.
The ex-president coming face to face with the man who used to do his dirty work, who now has turned into the key witness.
Telling the court, quote, everything required Mr. Trump's sign-off.
Will Cohen keep his cool when Trump's lawyers begin what could be an intense cross-examination?
I think the punches are building cumulatively. I think Tuesday there were bruises, and today there's blood.
Mr. Cohen is a bad human being.
If I was a juror in this case, watching that, I would think this guy's making this up as he's going along.
Is he making it up as he goes along? We've heard different people, legal experts, longtime journalists, and just other observers who've been close to this falling. And I can tell you I was inside the courtroom, as you saw there, several times covering this trial, including that key cross on Thursday. And Cohen did give the DAs what they wanted, including corroboration of what he says were real-time proof of Trump being in on this criminal scheme. But as Thursday continued, the defense continued to chip away at his credibility. Monday, the prosecution had Cohen narrating the entire hush money scheme. It looked bad for defendant Trump. The questions were about the catch and kill, the Playboy model, and the adult actress. Cohen testified Trump knew there would be a, quote, significant impact on his presidential campaign if these stories came out. Prosecutors pressed Cohen about the Daniels payment, and Cohen said Trump was angry to learn the whole thing had resurfaced. I thought you took care of this, an angry Trump said, according to Cohen's testimony. I thought this was under control. Just take care of it. And Cohen recounted what he did was at the direction of and the benefit for Trump. This was a damning picture, and that Trump was not only in on everything, but sharing in real time his own motives. In other words, if you believe Cohen, you now have the motive piece, and you don't even need Cohen for the tabloid and the money piece because you have other witnesses and the checks. So that looked bad. It was bad for defendant Trump, and we reported on it. And then came the cross-exam. And whatever happens in this historic trial, this is what everyone's been gearing up for, because over several days, you had these defense attorneys going at Cohen's credibility, not just saying he changed his story. That was previewed, and the jury had been told that already. But that he continues to dissemble and lie, not just about the core evidence in this case, but about other unrelated stuff. And that his personal vendetta has not only clouded his judgment, but that he personally cares so much, as he confirmed, they raised questions about whether that has colored or even distorted his ability to tell the truth on the stand. Trump's defense aggressively pushing and questioning cajoling Cohen on all kinds of things. And let's be clear, and I've mentioned this in my reporting thus far, some of it didn't completely add up. Some of it didn't create a logical counter story. But cumulatively, over the days, as I've told you, it did appear to poke holes in not only Cohen's credibility, but something else that jurors may care about. They're human beings, and they're trying to decide who to believe. Whether he, over time, went straight and told the truth, or continued to be a kind of angry, unreliable person who was constantly publicly insulting the man he used to look up to.
Donald cares for no one or anything other than himself.
I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat. And I am going to jail in part because of my decision to help Mr. Trump hide that payment from the American people before they voted a few days later.
Do you remember that moment? That's now about 4.5, 5 years ago, and we've got all the way up to this trial, the only trial that Trump is facing after effectively delaying the others with an assist from his own appointees on the conservative-leaning Supreme Court. So on the one hand, some people look at what you just saw there, and they see a whistleblower. They see someone who made mistakes but came clean. Other people, though, and this is what the defense is pushing, might see someone who had one story to benefit in one way and another story when he got caught, and maybe even another story as time went on. So they pushed him on the kind of resistance figure he's become with a podcast that repeatedly, meticulously documents his time with Trump and his turning against Trump, and T-shirts that show his one-time boss and mentor now in a prison cell, and how much he's motivated potentially by revenge. The man wrote a book called Revenge. Trump's lawyer also just tried to, sometimes just bait him. You can see the cartoonist, the sketch artist there showing a lawyer who looks like clearly the most upset person in the room or the most heated in this moment, saying, we're not asking for your beliefs. The jury doesn't want to hear what you think happened. He also called him a liar at one point, and Cohen responded and rebutted that. The courthouse in Lower Manhattan also became something of a MAGA gathering place. And what you see on your screen is not normal. I want you to understand that. I try to cover this stuff very fairly with the evidence. The people assembled to attack the rule of law, to undermine the actual jury that's sitting, which is legally authorized to make this decision, those were the right-wing Republicans that gathered in person to do that, including the highest-ranking Republican in the federal government, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and other lawmakers. You see him there making this political pilgrimage. And then he was outflanked to his right by Matt Gaetz, the figure who helped topple the last speaker and who clearly has leverage over the current speaker, along with some other right-wing figures. They're there. They lionize Trump in the same way Cohen used to, and they're saying things that Trump has actually been busted for saying in violation of the gag order, and so he's sort of handed that off, which some experts say could be a second violation, a new violation of the gag order, or 11th or 12th, literally, as they came out and did Trump's dirty work.
The judge inside, his daughter is making millions of dollars running against Donald Trump, raising money for Donald Trump's political opponents.
The judge's own daughter is making millions of dollars doing online fundraising for Democrats.
The judge's daughter is a political operative and raises money for Democrats.
What you just heard is wrong. And it's not just coming from a beleaguered defendant desperately trying to muddy the waters or from his own random paid political hacks, but from people who are leaders in government. If you've been watching our special coverage, you may have noticed that we at MSNBC are trying very hard to cover this very historic trial fairly. You'll see on people from both sides. You'll see independent legal experts. You'll see people say things about the trial where some people might get mad, but don't shoot the messenger. We're just telling you how the trial is going. There's no two sides, though, to what you just heard there. A, it might be a gag order violation if, as one reporter said, Donald Trump was publicly, personally writing those lines, because it's a violation of the gag order to instruct others on behalf of the defendant to attack family members, children of the judge, as it should be. But second, and more widely, I want to be clear. Those officials have every right to attend the trial, to observe it, have every right to weigh in on it to some degree. But they have systematically, several of them I just played for you and several others who've come to town, they haven't just done that. They have undermined the rule of law in advance, before this jury even hears the case. They have contributed to an environment where if they don't get the result they want, they will say, oh, we've already been attacking this court. And if they do, it's entirely possible that the defendant could be acquitted or have a hung jury and thus not be convicted. Then they'll just move right along without any apparent care for the system of government that they're in. Remember, they're not just random commentators. They are members of the government, which has three branches, and this is one of them. And it is the judicial branch that is supposed to be respected precisely because it is the less partisan branch. It doesn't just do press releases. We haven't heard the DA respond to any of those politicians, let alone the judge. And yet these people who know how it works are undermining it. When I say it's not normal, I mean it's not normal and it's not done. We have had a tradition of presidents in both parties, it's changed recently with the one who's on trial, but a tradition of saying, we'll wait to hear what the jury decides and we will respect the ruling, the decision of the jury, just as you must respect Supreme Court rulings, because otherwise the whole system crumbles and you don't have a rule of law democracy anymore. So while this may look like a Trump, anti-Trump thing, it's actually a much larger problem. And I promise you, if folks show up at Democrat Bob Menendez's corruption trial and do the same thing, I will tell you about it. So far, we haven't seen that happen. In fact, we haven't seen prominent Democratic politicians go there. I say that as a matter of fact. We can't do false equivalence when there's no equivalence to the underlying situation. But we have to be careful at a time where people have already attacked the last peaceful transfer of power and that election, which had no real question about the winner. The current president won by 3 states. The Supreme Court didn't take any appeals. There were none strong enough to even hear, let alone overturn the results. But you know what happened. We had an insurrection. And now we have that same crowd challenging the next election because Trump might lose. They're worried he'll lose, and they're already challenged that. And now they're challenging the judicial process of our fellow citizens to judge him as they should judge any other defendant, because that's what happens when you live in a rule of law democracy. So while this trial is about the verdict, it's also about so much more.